Greetings, allies. It is Monday, June 15th. Cheers. Here is your cup of Jones. A good Star Wars announcement this morning. Well, it's like a Star Wars party. You know what I mean? That's really what we had this morning. We didn't learn much. We learned that the game is $40. We learned it'll be 5v5. You'll be in the cockpit, which is fascinating. But the announcement was last week, and we'll actually really see it later this week. This is kind of just some interim. It's the Super Bowl halftime show. It's basically what we got as far as Star Wars Squadrons is concerned. Of course, I'm just thinking about Star Wars. You catch a Cup of Jones on a Star Wars day when anything happens. I'm currently making my way through Clone Wars. I finished Rebels, all 4 seasons. So I'm thinking a lot about Star Wars right now. And it's exciting to be hyped for something that doesn't involve Jedi. It's just, you just got these soldiers, these pilots doing the best they can, pew-pewing in space. Cheers, everybody. It is a good time for easy allies. Aaron Kirk, they did not say any of those things in the trailer. Very excellent point. And they totally could have. I feel bad because I have friends, I know people that are working on the game, and I want to support them and be like, yay, the game looks great. A lot of people pointed out, I saw even in chat here, that like Jedi Fallen Order had like okay trailers, and like that game was very, very good. These times are good for easy allies right now. Again, we talked last week about numbers, wanting numbers to be higher than they are, but we have lots of different revenue streams. We are diversifying ourselves in terms of ways that we can make money on various platforms. And so the outlook is bright for easy allies. Obviously, we're very excited to get back into the studio one day, but this last week was E3 week. We are still kind of experiencing it. EA Plays this Thursday. We got Baldur's Gate 3 news dropping this week. We just had the Star Wars trailer this morning. So there's a lot of things to react to. If you have missed all of them by some chance, we reacted to the PlayStation 5 2 Days of the Guerrilla Collective, the PC Gaming Show, Future Games, Star Wars this morning, and we will have more reactions later this week that I will get to once we look at the schedule. And all of those are doing really well. And so thank you to everybody that is tuning in for all of those things. Thank you to everybody. Thank you especially to our mods, because a lot of times when we do those reactions, we're very focused on what is actually happening on screen. And thank you to chat, because there's a lot of news that's flying around right when things get announced, and it's really nice to have people in chat notifying us of things. I was totally behind on a lot of that news this morning for Star Wars Squadrons, and our community is really great getting in there, being excited with us, offering opinions, and updating us on press releases and stuff that goes out. And so thank you to everybody tuning in. Thank you to for getting the word out about Easy Allies doing reactions. We actually had a really great moment, because I've been playing lots of a lot of my gaming, I got to be honest, lately has been mobile, because I'm watching the little boy. And so he's, little Milo is at the age where he's going to be 1 in a week. In less than a week, he's going to be a year old. And he's at the age where it's really kind of best to just let him roam around. Like, he's really crawling and exploring things and picking stuff up, and, getting into parts of the house that he was not able to get into before. And so I'm just kind of standing over him and playing little stupid mobile games. And a lot of those games involve ads, and I get like video ads a lot that will get me currency in the game, and so I'll just click on something and put it on a shelf. Where's Jones going with this? Some of those ads are Twitch ads, and the way that Twitch advertises is very focused on specific types of games, specific types of experiences, whether you're watching an art stream or League of Legends or Fortnite. And they just recently did an ad about the PlayStation 5 reveal that we were featured in. And so it's nice that, and they had really had to repurpose our stream for that. And so it's nice to see us get recognized again for something that I think we do well, and I think we are known for, and I think works well for us, really fits in well with our schedule. We're still able to do shows and reviews and podcasts, stuff outside of that. But of course, when big events happen, all of that stuff gets pushed aside as far as it can for us to do reactions, because they're good for our channel, but they're also something that we very much enjoy. And so we hope you enjoyed those reactions and then all that stuff. Obviously, there's still stuff that is now being planned for June. We got Cyberpunk on the horizon. Got a lot of fun stuff to watch this summer. And thank you for hanging out with all of us and watching it. Speaking of shows, I am definitely a mobile mark. We have a new show happening right now. It is not a thing you can go find on our YouTube channel yet, because there is early access for our premier members on patreon.com/easyallies. It is called Hunting Huber. We wanted to launch it. We had planned to launch it the week where obviously Black Lives still matter, but where Black Lives Matter was definitely the conversation that was happening. And we thought, launching the show at the time was going to be not the best idea for Easy Allies. And so waited a week to do it. That you get those episodes a week in advance. All of those episodes, there are 9 episodes, all of them 8 episodes, all of them feature couldn't be 9 episodes, even if we wanted. But the 9th episode is the episode that Kyle did before he left. There are 8 episodes, one with each ally. All of us, picked the game that we wanted to hunt Huber in. The setup is simple. Huber and whoever he is playing with cannot see or hear each other. And so Huber is put at a disadvantage. And then we hunt Huber. I don't know if you could tell or maybe guess by the promo that we put out, but I hunted Huber in my beloved Red Dead Redemption 2, more specifically Red Dead Online, and really had a good time. Went way past the allotted time that I was given to 7 episodes. Okay. Way past, thank you, Blood. Way past the amount of time that I was given to hunt Huber because I was having too much gosh darn fun. But Ian was just cracking up putting that show together. He had a really good time. And thanks to Don for sharing that load 50-50 with Ian to produce that show. Thank you, Huber, for making time. And it was neat because we've done new shows, we've premiered things before outside of what we normally do, but that was definitely all hands on deck. That everybody was involved in that across all of Easy Allies, and so excited to see some of those episodes that I haven't seen. I've seen mine episode, and I've seen the pilot, but it'll be interesting and obviously Kyle's episode from before. But excited to watch all of those, and excited to get feedback, and potentially excited to maybe do another season someday. Maybe boot up GTA Online, hunt Huber again. We had an interesting video. We haven't done demo impressions in a long time. And Ian, Bloodworth, and Huber, correct me if I'm wrong, Blood, sat down and talked about the demo for In Sound Mind. Lots of demos out there, lots of new stuff that's been announced. There's like over 100 games that we've gotten updates on or were announced in the last 3 or 4 days. And so there's lots of demos floating around there. This is one of those games that people were talking about. Some of the developers were very excited that we were involved. They've long been fans of game trailers and Easy Allies. And so that impressions video is up. You can check that out. And we have a very big review, probably one of the biggest reviews of the year. Michael Huber dropped his review score and review edit, edited by yours truly, the video at least, of The Last of Us Part 2. And we very quickly were added to all of the promotional material that is being sent out by Sony on behalf of Naughty Dog for Last of Us Part 2. And if you are able to, it is a extremely non-spoilerific review. If you are maybe on the fence for watching it, I had next to nothing to cut that thing. I really had to be, it's just like 2 areas. You were just circling basically for that review. And it was really tricky. It'd be like, I can kind of sense something I don't usually do in reviews. There's one edit that you do not see what I'm talking about. Like Huber mentioned something and I'm like, do we have a clip of that? He's like, I don't. And it's in areas that we just can't show. And so that is possibly one of the most non-spoilery reviews. I don't even think I got like cutscenes to cut with. I think I could go back and look at trailers, but I really wanted to avoid that stuff. We got some B-roll sent to us from Sony. So thank you, Sony, for that. But review copy provided by PlayStation. But yeah, very, very, very not spoilery. And thankfully, I've managed to dodge all the Last of Us Part 2 spoilers. That comes out this Friday, right? So yeah, enjoy, everyone. And you might hear, obviously, all of you are in other parts of the United States or around the world, and so all of you are affected in different ways by COVID-19 and by the quarantine, stay-at-home orders. Those are gradually being lifted in the state of California, which we are currently in. And you might hear that production has started to pick up again in California. Obviously, we have a lot of production across the internet and television and film in Los Angeles. But it doesn't really fit Easy Allies yet, and likely will not for another couple months, possibly until the end of the year, because a lot of the ways that these are being structured, kind of similarly to ways that things like the NFL and MLB has talked about possibly reopening, in that they basically quarantine everybody involved. So there are productions that are starting It is worth pointing out, though, that Blood has been spoiled to the moon and back about Last of Us Part 2, because Blood is in there checking our YouTube comments, deleting all those spoilers from all of our comments, flagging those people that are changing their names and avatars into Last of Us spoilers. So Blood is on the front lines for you, so you don't get spoiled via Easy Allies content on YouTube, and therefore is having the entire game spoiled for him. So I love you, Blood. Thank you very much for doing that. Long story short, if you're going to be working on a TV show, or you're going to be working on a commercial or a movie or something, then you can do that location-based, but everybody's got to be quarantined at that location. So we could possibly return to the studio soon, but we would have to live there. And so it doesn't really matter, easy living's fun, but on a regular basis, for weeks and weeks, it's probably not something that's really going to work out. So just wanted to mention that now, because I want to bring these things up, so you don't get a sense that we're in a rut in terms of the quarantine and where we are at with production, because we do have this wonderful studio. Blood stopped by the other day and said it's just odd. It's like this moment kind of frozen in time with that studio. It's going to be really interesting. Just the vibe getting back there. It's going to be interesting to moderate the podcast eventually in the studio one day, which will transition me into my next bit, which is about today's editorial. And now that I have about 6 or 7 episodes of the Easy Allies podcast under my belt, there are things that I think I'm getting better at. There are things I'm more comfortable with. It's tricky because it's never the same podcast every week. And so I'll have a podcast that has really great news. I'll have a podcast that has less news. I'll have a podcast where there's really one big thing we could talk about. I had a podcast where we talked about racism a little bit. There's been lots of interesting challenges with the podcast. And then the week after, reading feedback about what people liked, what people didn't. Of course, always open to any and all feedback here via the questions on Cup of Jones or on chat. And I am pretty comfortable, at least with things that need to be improved, things that I can work on. I hate the opening bit. I absolutely hate doing a bit at the opening of the podcast. I really don't enjoy it. I don't think I do a good job with it. I don't think I'm going to do it anymore. So let's talk about that in today's editorial. Speaking, of course, currently of Gaming Gladiators, and kudos to Bossman for doing all the lovely bits that he did in the past. I'm just absolutely awful at them. Awful at doing them, awful at thinking of them, awful at pulling them off. And so we'll talk about potentially what could take their place. Obviously, I want people at the $5 tier to be as engaged in the podcast as possible. So we'll talk about that. Moving on, let's look at our schedule before we do. One of these things you already missed. One of these things, if you didn't turn out live for a Star Wars Squadrons reactions, I love that Blood sent me the thumbnail for the reactions after we did it. And he's like, I'm not going to put our faces on this one because we weren't that excited. I am excited about Star Wars Squadrons. We were not that excited about that trailer specifically. Cup of Jones, it's happening right now. You're in one. Stream Team has not been officially decided tomorrow. They're tallying all the votes. Thank you to everybody for weighing in on that. I will be a part of that Stream Team, and we will be playing that tomorrow. It's always exciting to get those initial games that people suggest. Just be like, wow, that's a lot of different stuff across the board. So it's gonna be interesting to see what we actually play tomorrow. I'm in the edge of my seat. We are going to be playing Dead by Daylight, which just had some new fun Silent Hill offerings added to it. So there will be more hunting of various allies happening tomorrow night on our group stream at 6 p.m. Pacific time. The next episode of Hunting Huber, which will be early access for patrons, but will finally go to YouTube for everybody else, will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ben's Dojo will be an hour after that, playing Mortal Kombat 11 Aftermath. According to Mike and Mike, they're going to be finishing up Portal 2. They are near the end of that, and they're going to be playing that Wednesday afternoon. Huber Syndrome's on Thursday. Thursday's a great day for reactions. Baldur's Gate 3 reactions, which I may not be a part of. I think I've been on every single reaction video so far. I think I might sit that one out and watch that later, but I will definitely be on hand for the EA Play reactions at 4 p.m. because we're going to be getting more looks at, or actually a look at Star Wars Squadrons and potentially more stuff that EA is offering. The podcast's on Friday. Reaction Shots also on Friday. Persona 5 Royal with Ben will be on Friday as well, along with PSO2. So there's a lot of things that Ben is hammering out that day. Dawn versus Wave Race coming to you Friday night at 9 p.m. The Animal Crossing Island Hop returns this Saturday. I will be sending out a ton of friend codes probably on Friday or Friday night. And so I hope a lot of you that have forgotten about that maybe get those. I will be sending out notifications on Friday before I go live that morning. So I don't send that out that morning. So everybody knows, hey, tomorrow morning, here are the people. And I'm going to go back to that first image that I sent out of all the people that are still on that list that you see on that list every single time. and cross them off, basically. Because I think there's like about 10 to 20 people that are just tuned out of Animal Crossing, that don't follow me on Twitter, that are not really engaged weekly with the schedule of Easy Allies, and just basically missed. They're basically at a point where they forgot that they sent me their information. So if they're not going to be around, then I will cross them off. And then if they reach out to me later and they're like, well, wait, I was like, well, where were you for 2 months? Then I'll get them back in. But I just think there's a lot of people down lower on the list that are waiting to be included. So I'm going to cross those people off, bump everybody back up. And I might not be able to get to all of them in one episode of the Animal Crossing Island Hop, but I still play Animal Crossing absolutely every day. I think I have missed the terminal some days. There's some days where I go to the terminal. I think twice it's happened since that game came out, where I missed my streak. But there has not been a day gone by that I have not at least booted that game up a little bit and run around, done something. So Animal Crossing is still very much a part of my life. I'm looking forward to experiencing what it means for your lives by going to your islands. Easy update on Saturday, Easy Allies podcast for everybody on Sunday, and then Sunday at 1. This unexpected treat that has popped up in past weeks. Brad Ellis going through various Zelda games, continuing his playthrough of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Business questions. Brandon K. Gann getting right to the tough stuff. Inspired by Kinda Funny Games Daily a couple weeks ago and Spawn on Me is a lesson in blackness, is EZA considering bringing on guests from marginalized communities in the gaming space? Those podcasts had meaningful and important conversations, and I believe EZA could also provide similar opportunities and growth for the audiences of the main podcast and Frame Trap. Yes, I would like to point out, before I get into this, that Spawn on Me, of course, is a podcast predominantly of African Americans, and so that was definitely a place where I think our entire industry focused their attention, and it was nice to see them get a lot of attention, and rightfully so. And obviously, Blessing is a Kinda Funny, and so that was really nice to see him take over, and his popularity in his career kind of skyrocket with his involvement in Kinda Funny. And I think that was just kind of like the right time and place for him to be involved in a lot of that content. There are a couple people I reached out to. Those people were busy. But those are people that I'm close friends with, and I have to admit, I was a bit uncomfortable reaching out to them because being at Easy Allies, I wasn't sure how it would look, say this as delicately as I possibly can, to reach out to somebody, a person of color, and say, hey, we need more diversity at Easy Allies. Would you just come and basically fill that role? To me, that feels a little bit unfair. To me, that feels a little bit disingenuous. And while obviously we want to give people a platform, I think my perspective last week was to help publicize their platforms, to help give them a voice via their own channels, via the own content that they were doing. And so I might have possibly been incorrectly and unfairly distracted by those things last week, but I spent a lot of time watching Kinda Funny, watching Spawn on Me, reading articles, watching the videos from all of these incredible protests that were happening around the world, and listening to other people following their perspectives. That might seem like an out. In some ways, I got to admit it is, of not being, brave enough to really tackle these issues, head on, not making a full pivot with Easy Allies to really promote people of color in our community and specifically in the gaming community that might not have as loud of a voice as they should have. And I felt bad because since I've taken over the podcast, and there are more comments coming up, more business questions specifically addressing this. A lot of people have talked about guests. A lot of people have talked about bringing other faces in. And shout out to Ian Hink, who has done, I think, a better job than any of us in really incorporating people of color, women, into our content much more than any of us have. And so I think we would have had much less of that here at Easy Allies if not for Ian's efforts. And I really, just taking over the podcast, really want to get comfortable. Again, excuses. Really wanted to get comfortable with what the podcast meant for me, what my role was in the podcast, how I can pivot in terms of things that go right, things that go wrong, just generally the vibe of the podcast and the rotation of the specific allies, notifying them when they were going to be on each show, getting specific allies on different episodes of the podcast pertaining to what we were going to cover. And I think I'm getting to the point. It's difficult because a lot of our focus is on reactions right now, is on, getting enough rest and doing our work at the right time so that we are available and ready and sharp when these reactions come up, even though I probably looked pretty tired when I got up for Star Wars this morning. And so I haven't been in the guest space as far as the podcast is concerned. All of that being said, Brandon, of course, this is not a bad idea. It's just not something where, given who we are, given our place in this industry, that's not specifically where my head was at. And I'll give you an example. Obviously, Sean Clinton is a close friend of mine, and we have been talking not about how he can be a part of Easy Allies, not about how I want to get him on camera talking about all these things, but just emotionally what he's going through. And to me, those conversations were so much more important to have. Shout out to Elisa Pearl as well, who is in Ripley, which is Amanda's improv troupe. And she's, had a tremendous weight on her shoulders, as I imagine a lot of African Americans feel, about educating people. And it should not be their responsibility to do so. But, teaching people essentially how to act, how to be, a friend to the African American community, and how to elevate the voices that should be elevated. So I'm learning a lot through her. I'm learning a lot through Sean. And I apologize that a lot of that, if any, is really represented through the specific content that we were doing. A lot of this is happening at a very interesting time, kicking off the summer and dealing with this kind of pseudo E3, non-E3 that we're having. And with the act of actually, going through the pandemic as well, Kyle leaving, taking over the podcast, a lot of distractions for me to have a tremendous amount of confidence in just getting a stranger on the phone and being like, we haven't met yet, but you're Black, so come on our show. That felt a little icky. And so I didn't want to do that and have that be how I met someone, have that be that I was kind of like objectifying somebody, and so that's what kept me away from doing that. But I think in a lot of ways, it's that type of fear, to be honest, that has kept me away from engaging a lot of times on social media, and just really, using our platform in the best ways possible. So, which is why, Monday night, I kind of touched on this a little bit last week, but Monday night, my head was really spinning, trying to figure out like what we were going to do last Tuesday before we ended up, delaying Stream Team and focusing our group stream on doing a fundraiser. It was like, is this too little? Is this too much? Is our messaging correct? Is this right to call our attention, even though all of that is going towards a good cause? And I think now, 1 week later, Rich just got married. Really? Wait, what? I think now the challenge is to keep that conversation going. I think a lot of, it's the general attention span of social media. A lot of times things don't last longer than a week. And so it's been really amazing seeing these protests seem to just grow in size and strength and impact. And so I think it's important to keep that conversation going. So I love that not only is this something that we're addressing in this episode of Cup of Jones, but Brandon just drops it right at that first question, almost always in every single episode. Rich Brown, love. Shout out to Rich Brown. Fabian Overdykink, with the release of the first Pokemon Sword Shield around the corner, it got me wondering, why are expansions like these relegated to frame trap duty instead of receiving reviews? Are DLCs not worthy of scores? What about changing the score of the original game after a significant DLC release? While I understand that producing a full review might be too time consuming, I feel like DLC releases are very underused at EZA, even though they offer the best gameplay experience of the entire game. Fight me. All right. You're not wrong. This is welcome to Review Musical Chairs. Welcome to there is a game that is coming out soon that I very, very much wish I could review, but I do not have the time. It's very difficult for us to weigh all of the options of all the things that we have to do, and what I actually got a little bit depressed watching all of the amazing reveals this week. A lot of games that Gloomwood, man, like it has a demo that I haven't even had a chance to check out. Maybe I'll have time to get it this week and play it. But it was just like, I want to review that, So it's like, and Ben is actually considering doing a review for this. And it's difficult too, communicating that to you as an audience. We don't want to say, oh yeah, we potentially want to review that, and then we don't do that. You ask after the fact, and we're like, oh yeah, we got busy. And you're like, well, you didn't communicate that to me, so I was excited about the review, and then it didn't happen, and now I'm disappointed. But for every DLC, if Ben was to decide to review Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC, then that would be taking away from some other awesome independent game that just came out. Blood and I were talking last night. Blood's got a game on his list. He's like, I would love to have time to get around to reviewing this thing. Shout out to Blood for finishing his Trials of Mana review, which took him a month. So to me, it's not a matter of game versus DLC. It's just review versus review. It's always how much, which is why you'll maybe see 1 or 2 reviews from us a week, because these things do take a tremendous amount of time, and it is never the case that any one specific ally is only working on that one thing. It's always a difficult decision whether we should delay or cancel or remove specific allies from activities that we do so they can have more times to work on reviews. How important is it for us to focus on hitting the embargo for one specific game versus another? Obviously, something like Last of Us, Huber can, go to the moon to play that game if he wants to. Like, that is something that we obviously want to, put at the forefront, because a lot of eyeballs are going to be on that, specifically what the scores are, and that'll be a great opportunity for exposure for Easy Allies. But it's never an easy decision as a group or individually what we're going to review versus another thing. I don't recall having conversations with the allies when we plan things for a meeting and we're like, hey, let's review that. And like, nah, it's DLC, forget it. Like, we would love to focus on something for a DLC, but I think we did review Pokemon Sword Shield, and it's the question of, do we want to introduce a new franchise to it? It's not a matter of that being more important. It's just, do we want to, diversify our perspective in terms of reviews, in terms of the franchises that we cover, and maybe, focus on something that did not show up in a frame trap, did not get focused, did not get lip service on something else that we did, and then give that review, give it its due, and really speak to, it's another thing as well, that this game that I probably won't have time to review, it speaks to me. It definitely is something that interests me. It's, kind of reaching outside of my usual comfort zone with games, but it is in a genre that I very much enjoy. But I will take that to heart. And anytime somebody, if they might possibly speak ill of DLC, I will mention that DLC reviews offer the best gameplay experience of an entire game. Fight me. Kola Ina. I struggle to write this. I really miss Kyle as a part of EZA. And for me, it doesn't feel the same without him. But I also really like you guys as well, and I'm not sure how to sort through these feelings. Any tips or suggestions? Kola, what you are talking about is change. And change can be positive. Change also sucks. And one of the ways that I dealt with Kyle leaving is basically an experience with that professionally. Ever since I worked at, I started Game Trailers in 2002, started working at MTV and Viacom in 2006. Obviously moved over to Defy in 2016, 15, 16. And people came and went all the time. The guy, my friend Jeff, who I founded GameTrailers.com with, walked into my office one day and he's like, I'm out. And I was like, cool, you gonna go get lunch? He's like, no, I'm out. I'm leaving the company. I'm gonna go do something else. And he created a startup and he's doing very well. And so I've always had the mindset that things were good, but things will change someday. Things will be different. My life has changed big time compared to where I was a year ago, where we did not have a child and we did get a full night's sleep. It was wonderful. And things are different. I very much enjoy having Milo in my life now, but things are different. My life is definitely different. I got a lot less time to play games, and so sacrifices have to be made. And what I don't know what to tell you is when you say it doesn't feel the same without him. It obviously doesn't. Kyle was not replaced. We didn't swap him in for a clone or someone else that was going to do the things specifically that Kyle did. And while that does make me sad as well, it does make me appreciate how wonderful and beautiful Kyle is as a creative entity and just a person. While I miss the guy, I certainly wish he was still hosting the podcast so I didn't have to, shoulder that responsibility. I got to admit, it was fun watching him do do's and don'ts. Of course, we just happened to stream at the same time. We didn't plan that, but we just streamed right on top of his produced show that he created. And so it was fun to see him with his long hair trying to pull off something in his apartment and be thinking if he was still at Easy Allies and was putting something like that together, how, what the things he would be nervous about, the things that he would want to go well, and the issues that he would be having, in his, creative pursuits, the stuff that all of us struggle with and trying to make our work as good as it can possibly be. And so that's, I think that's basically what you have to juggle. It's like, every time you feel you listen to the Easy Allies podcast and you're like, Kyle was better at this, and you're not wrong. Or you watch a group stream, or we the next time we do Hall of Greats and Kyle's not there, and you just think like there definitely is something missing. There's a vibe missing. There's a voice missing. I have definitely had that sentiment specifically expressed to me through various channels in terms of what currently does not exist at Easy Allies because Kyle is gone. On the other hand, you get to watch Kyle do things Kyle has never done before. And a lot of that stuff he's just beginning to work on. He's, now being involved in projects that will not bear fruit for a while. But when those things happen, I'm very excited for him to just, again, pop up into our lives again and say, hey, I was working on this creative project. What do you think? Whether that's something that a job that I got, expressing a passion of mine, or working on a skill that I had not had the time to develop before, or if it's just something that I created myself. I selfishly want him still around, but at the same time, I want to see what the guy can do when he spreads his wings. So I am excited about that, but I'm not going to lie. I feel the same way. It definitely is. For us doing as much work as we do, it was easier for us to adapt to those things, at least for me. That yes, it does feel different without him, but I'm at the stage now where when I see Kyle, it's like, oh yeah, Kyle, just because the work that we do just never stops. It's day and day and day. And so we really just kind of have to like get back to the assembly line. But that would be my major tip, to just understand the yin and yang of that situation, that the bonus is that you get to go see Kyle, try out new stuff. Good luck, Kyle. Alexander Zarianov, is it possible to continue doing Q&As via Zoom when you return to the studio? Might not happen, but I'll bring it up with the group. I can name 3 benefits of this. 1, it's easier to see you and hear you. In the studio, multiple allies sometimes talk simultaneously, and I never saw that during Zoom calls. It's definitely happened. I've seen it before. It happens on the podcast. I try to stop it. But 2, if you have something to show, you can do so. If you need to write something or look at for something online, it's easier to do so. I have definitely enjoyed doing the community showcase more from home, that I, commute aside. It's just been easier to handle everything at the computer. And so one thing that I've pondered doing in the past, and we might do this in the future, to get a nice camera at the desk so that whoever is operating the desk in the streaming room has their own camera on them. It's just a question of how those inputs work with the PC, and there's just equipment that we've just never bothered to buy. But I have wondered about doing the showcase that way so I can be at the computer. It's just, I think it would be weird to just have like the ally in question just sitting alone on the couch. But that'll be, I want to continue this comment. Hold on. This benefits questions like favorite collector's item, kill your babies, and best soundtracks on a console. Number 3, cats. I love cats and love seeing how Damiani and Ben pet their furry friends. I also think that seeing pets contributes to the raw and personal feeling of the Q&A, which, in my opinion, is what this tier is all about. I can bring it up the group. It was definitely a move into the studio that all of us felt benefited us for lots of ways. I honestly, it's been so long, feels like it's been so long since we've been in the studio that I don't remember specifically those details. But I remember after we did it the first time, we all looked at each other and were like, we enjoyed that a lot more. But you do bring up some interesting points. And I wonder how Easy Allies will change even when we get the opportunity to do everything again in the studio. And if we make the decision to do some things potentially still at home the way we are currently doing them now, the way that we have practiced doing them in this quarantine, how our community will react to that as well. Or we can just bring cats in the studio. It's an excellent point. Brandon Ray. Once you or an ally have decided to review a game, how important are blind impressions? Specifically, do you make an effort to avoid seeing a game's early Metacritic score or listening to previews from other outlets, or do you think public sentiment has an unconscious impact on your reviews? Not sure if you can speak for all allies. I never can. I certainly can't in this instance. But curious if you have discussed this internally. No, it's not something that we tell people not to do. Knowing the allies that review games in our company, I don't see that as something that they generally would do. Maybe like that first preview, maybe just to get information, because it's always good once a game launches to kind of understand what's going on in this game, to understand if it's something that you personally want to review, if you're interested enough to work on it, or if you feel that your voice would fit that particular review, or if it's something that you would want to broaden your horizons to work on. I know that, whereas when you get closer to a launch, that's when I think things get kind of sticky, watching like launch trailers and stuff, and that stuff can kind of cloud your mind. I know Huber, goes media blackout on lots of different things. I have been on many different sides of this. There are some games that have taken me a long time to review, and so I have been familiar with the Metacritic score before I supplied my score, before I guess posted my score. But the reason why I think blind impressions for me aren't super important, like maybe they do have an unconscious impact, but if it's an unconscious, then I'm obviously not aware that it's happening. But when I play a game, really a review score kind of shouts itself out at me, which is why I love the review format that we have here at Easy Allies. But the review format that I developed at Game Trailers was a 100-point scale, and I got very comfortable with that because that roller coaster ride is kind of what my brain goes through when I'm playing a game. It starts at a point, and then as the game improves, or the opposite in my mind, that review score goes up by a little 1 point here and there. And so I felt very comfortable doing that just purely based on my own experience. I don't really feel like I would, if I came out and reviewed a game and gave it a score and then saw the Metacritic or talked to someone else that was super hot on a game that I was not very interested in. I remember going to Call of Duty review events, and that's a very interesting scenario because you're with everybody and you don't want to talk about like what you're going to score, but you can still kind of get the vibe from what people like and what people don't like when you're in a room and playing multiplayer for like 2-3 days straight. Set up in a hotel, you get up the next day and you just play Call of Duty all day, and you go to bed, you get up the next day and you play Call of Duty all day. And every now and then I would see someone that's like, nah, I'm not, I'm gonna go get lunch, I'm just not interested in this. And it's like, okay, well, I like it, so your opinion's great, but it's not going to affect mine. Again, there might be some unconscious stuff going on there, but I can't speak to when I was unconscious. I slept last night. I don't have a lot to report. But I certainly would not be upset at any ally if they wanted to abstain from something or not cover something or stay away from a group stream. That's just not something that's, I believe, at even way back in Game Trailers. Although I was not, obviously, when Shane and Ryan were the heads of those editorial teams, I was not very involved in that review process for games that I was not, directly working on. But I do not recall many instances of that being a concern, of just being, do not read or hear anything from everybody else before you work on a game. Parasite Paladin, will goals ever come back? Probably not. And if they ever do, I feel like sticking to if the goal isn't met, the show stops is a decent driver for pledges to stay around. Like, for example, a monthly Love and Respect only podcast. And speaking of, with you in charge of the podcast, how do you plan on going about doing Love and Respect podcasts if you have any interest in it, in all that is? In it at all, that is. I'll probably have to do it because for the same reasons that Kyle felt he had to do it in the past, because it was just that we were gone for the holidays, or there's just some reason that we weren't able to do a regular podcast. I think Love and Respect only podcasts are a great way to fill that gap, because we have those people at the tier, which I will get to in my editorial, that we want to make happy, and we want to have them feel involved and have them feel a value of belonging to that tier. But I don't think goals will ever come back, because when you say if the goal isn't met, the show stops, that sounds great in terms of driving pledges for a particular goal, but pledges for a particular goal, pledges for the amount that we are at with Easy Allies, what people want to get in terms of what they would want to get as a reward for a specific tier, or what they would want to see Easy Allies do based on how we hit a specific goal, what actually is met at that goal, what you get for us meeting that goal, is just one small part of why we are at the number that we're at. So you could have circumstances completely outside of any specific goal that either raise or lower the total value of Easy Allies on Patreon. And so when you say if the goal isn't met, the show stops, you have to consider how exhausting that is for us as show producers. To have it go up and then, oh, okay, we're back up. Well, I was planning on reviewing this game, but I guess I'm doing that show this week, so I'll do that, or this month. And then you do that show, and then the next month it drops again. So, okay, well, I guess I won't do that. And then the next month, oh, it's back again. Okay, let me get back to doing it. I think that makes our YouTube channel confusing. I think that confuses people that are more interested in our YouTube channel and are not necessarily involved in our Patreon. It's just kind of messy across the board. So, I do not see goals coming back. I think that was a very big decision on our part, and if they do come back, that'll represent a huge fundamental change at Easy Allies. But chat is frozen for me. Chat hasn't scrolled by in a while. Nobody said anything in a while. I hope everybody's still there. I'm not dropping any frames. Let me see if this blood messaged me and said I'm not offline. Nope. Okay. Oh, there we go. Chat's moving again. Jesse Nye, any plans to play or cover Desperados 3? Yes. Next Gen Hef, the real E3, etc. events have begun. After seeing the first few, which do you guys prefer, when it was all in 1 week or now that the events are pretty spaced out? How do you guys plan on handling the coverage of all the events? Maybe near the end of the summer, you guys could have a week of reflection covering, going over the announcements you guys loved, as well as demos that are worth checking out. Finally, with all the games announced on Saturday, I had with all the games that were announced on Saturday, I had a podcast segment idea, wish list this. Have each panelist give a game from the conferences that they added to their Steam Epic wish list and why. Yes, I have thought long and hard about what I'm going to do for the podcast this week, because there are way more games than can be discussed. And I think those are two avenues that I'm looking at specifically. One is what you basically described, like kind of looking through all of this madness and, you know, going to each ally and saying, like, give me one game out of all of that stuff, one game that you're excited about and why. Let's talk about it. And also just talking about those shows in general, talking about Future Game Show. We talked about this a little bit just in the reactions where we talked, you know, about, you know, we score these press conferences and what we think about them. But specifically how these were constructed, how Guerrilla was constructed over a 3-day period. Is this something that we think is sustainable even in a regular E3 environment? Is it something that we preferred over ways that other press conferences have gone? Is it weird to watch all of these big stacked press conferences and then get an EA Play that only focuses on like 6 or 7 games? Are they good? Are they bad? I'm looking forward to having those conversations, but wishlist this is maybe a name I will steal. If I do, thank you very much, Next Gen Hef. Callum, in the light of the PS5 event last week and the presumably many more major events to come, have you and the other allies ever considered doing an official spoiler mode type of discussion that could take place a couple of days after an event? Obviously, you all provide your immediate thoughts after the show and run through the announcements again on the podcast, but it would be fun to discuss the points and questions that arise after we've all had the time to dwell on the things we saw and were told. It could also be a good place for patrons in the community to give their perspectives and feedback on the event, widening the discussion and creating broad and differing viewpoints for the allies to discuss. For example, I wasn't as high on the event as many of the allies, and I think it would be fun for Huber to spend 5 minutes telling me how wrong I am and to be more excited. For any one specific event, where I know that for those of you that are very involved with us in our discussions and our opinions, which I am eternally grateful for, I think from an outside advertising perspective, it would confuse people that didn't know what they were getting because they got your description there and just saw a video that was like, let's talk about that PlayStation reveal one more time. And they're like, oh, did new specs come out on the PlayStation 5? And it's like, no, it's just them, again, going over like the specific announcements. I think that would be tough sell. I could see that being downvoted a lot on YouTube. I could see a lot of negative comments where they're like, I clicked on this because I thought there's going to be something new, but it's just you know, retreading old ground. But going back to what Next Gen Hef just said, it'd be interesting if, or it might have been somebody earlier, after all of this E3 or not E3-ness is done, it might be interesting to look back, at the very least, a podcast segment and then look at the summer and talk about like, okay, well, this is a weird summer. What do we think about how this went? Who did it well? Who did it? Who messed up? You know, be interesting to see that when we next hear from Nintendo, you know, because they said they weren't going to get their stuff together by June to have a direct, even though they would if there regularly was E3. And so it's interesting having Baldur's Gate 3 showed up, and I think it was the PC Gaming Show, and announced a release date or a release date for a beta or something, and then said, but we don't know. You know, we're doing the best job that we can for those of us that are in the office, those of us that are staying home. We just can't make any concrete promises. And so it'll be interesting to see when the dust settles and we move from this press conference season we were used to having gone to an E3 and a Comic-Con and a PAX, and we don't get those things and just kind of focus on the stuff that we get to experience online. We've played a lot of these demos from stuff that we've seen announced in these events, and then looked after the fact, kind of as a post-mortem. Could be interesting. Neil Gecki, following the Future Games show on Saturday, you raided Kyle's channel. His viewership numbers jumped up quite a bit, and after checking in again and an hour later, the numbers and activity were still well above what I normally see during Easy Allies / Kyle Gaming streams. This reminded me of good old TV tactics, slotting a new or unpopular show directly after a cash cow so that people might stick around. Why don't you try this for your own content? I'm watching the Guerrilla Collective right now and Brad is not on it. However, there is a 2-hour gap between the scheduled ending and Brad's stream. You may be missing out on some carryover potential. Sure, I'll bring that up. Again, in that case, that was Brad saying, I'm going to be streaming later. So I'm not going to be at the, so I can get rest. I'm not going to be at the reactions that morning, but I will be streaming later and I want to stream at that time. And so I don't know if, how responsive Brad would be to be like, no, Brad, you're streaming right after we end the press conference. And some of these things, we don't know how long they're going to take. We don't know if it's going to go right up until when that thing starts. And so if you have people that really want to tune into that full playthrough and they're like, all right, I'll see Brad at 1, and then they show up later and it's like, no, Brad actually went earlier. You missed it for like an hour. And they're like, what? And it's like, yeah, because the Guerrilla Collective ended earlier. And so then Brad started. But what you are introducing is a lot of the reason why we drop trailers after we have the group stream. Is like we've got everybody, and so we want to have a captive audience for those announcements. And so potentially we could, and it is kind of fun to have back-to-back things that you've seen in our schedule. If we have something going on, it's fun to have something immediately following that stream team, and then the group stream, right after it. After a little bit of a break, we don't want to have something just butt to the hour right up against something, because that can be a recipe for a disaster potentially, because a lot of those streams you don't necessarily have control, especially if it's multiplayer focused. You don't have a ton of control over picking the specific minute when those things end. But that is a successful TV tactic, and it does kind of speak to some of the differences between TV programming and live Twitch programming. But it's not a terrible idea. I just don't think it's applicable in many, many instances. I am terrified reading this next question. Asbo Zapruder. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with this. They said someone will come look at it tomorrow. But if Easy Allies was a model in 18th century France, would it stay with the aloof genius artist or go to America with the pastry chef? Okay. I'm exposed. Let me lift the curtain and reveal to all of you what the heck has been going on the last year or 2 years. How long have we been doing this, Asbo? So Asbo and I like musical theater a lot. And Asbo drops questions every week asking if Easy Allies was similar to a musical or a character in a musical or a situation in a musical. And then I will respond with a hopefully quick, sly response that may be only understood by 1, maybe 2 or 3 people, and then move on as quickly as possible to the next question. Asbo, I have no idea what musical you're referencing here. I've done pretty good. There are a couple times I had to Google it. There are a couple times I'm like, yes, I know what that is. Is that what? Like, what is that? Is that cabaret or what? And I'll Google it. I'm like, yes, that's what that is. That's right. And then I'll come up with an answer. This is like ungoogleable. I don't know. Aloof genius, pastry chef, 18th century France model. It doesn't come up with a lot. So I got nothing. Does anybody know what this is? What is it? I have no idea what musical this is. So I feel seen. I did my musical theater knowledge got me to this point. But did not get me any farther. Sunday in the Park with George. Thank you. Asbo Zapruder, a.k.a. Screaming Argonaut in Twitch chat and in YouTube. Sunday in the Park with George. Okay. That is a musical I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with the, obviously the name of the musical. I don't think that's a Sondheim. Is it a Sondheim? But I never saw that one. And I have... in concerts and in vocal training, when I used to take voice lessons, I've sung songs from Sunday in the Park with George, but I have never seen it. So I failed everybody. I failed Asbo. I failed you all. I've confused and frustrated people that were not familiar or possibly didn't enjoy that bit, which I completely understand. But, it's an anime reference. Okay, there we go. Runefire. Will Easy Allies be doing a spoiler mode for The Last of Us Part 2? Hell yeah. I appreciate how you didn't discuss the game's leaks prior to release, but once it comes out, I'd really be interested to hear some of the allies discuss how they think the leak affected the game's release. I think a lot of us kind of distanced ourselves from that, so I don't know how much of that conversation will pop up in the actual spoiler mode. I expect player reviews will be significantly more negative because of the leak, and I'm intrigued that major reviewers don't give scores like Kotaku, Polygon, and Ars Technica were extremely critical of the game when compared to reviewers that issued numerical scores. Interesting. I have not read any reviews of that game other than, obviously, Huber's. I've also read complaints that much of the game couldn't actually be discussed in the reviews per restrictions from Sony and or Naughty Dog. That happens all the time. That's not a Sony Naughty Dog thing. That is very, very prevalent in the reviews across the board. Reviews you wouldn't even think would be spoiler heavy, or you think you'd get weird limitations like what? It's like the reviews can't be longer than this, total running time. You can only use footage from this specific spot. Start footage after this. Like when I did Red Dead, it was all sorts of flags like don't show this, don't show that. So again, it'd be interesting to hear the Allies' take on these issues surrounding the actual game itself. Yeah. I don't know who will be directing that spoiler mode, if that will be Huber or someone else. We always put it on the person that is going to be hosting that spoiler mode, whether they want, what topics they specifically want to talk about, whether they want to take questions from our Patreon community. All of that changes. There's no specific format that we do for those spoiler modes. So got to play that game first, though. Hopefully we get more codes. Would very much love to get a code from Sony, but if not, I will definitely be buying that game and playing the hell out of it. Hopefully as soon as possible. And finally, Logan Young, a nice little short episode, nice little hour long if we can. What color will the box for Xbox Series X and PS5 be? My guess is black for Xbox and white for PS5. Xbox, no, it's not just the box. I guess you're talking about like the cardboard box, the things that it comes in. Obviously, there's more than one color on those boxes, but I guess you're talking about like the background color. Our new color schemes going in. If you want to make your mortises and your lower thirds and your thumbnails and everything for the Xbox and the PS5, Microsoft and Sony has given you your color schemes. This generation is black and green versus white and blue. That's it. There you go. Obviously, there is, some darker tones, some blackness going on in the PlayStation 5, but it is primarily a white and blue color scheme across the controllers and all of that other stuff. And obviously, there is a little bit of gray, a little bit of white detail in the Xbox, but it's primarily a black and green console. So, black, green, white, blue. Fight. Let's do this kooky editorial. Hi, everybody. Thank you for accepting me as the new moderator / host or whatever of the Easy Allies podcast. I've been extremely nervous working on the podcast just because it reminds me of surfing a little bit. When I fell in love with surfing was after I caught my first really good wave. And the thing about surfing is you got to wait a lot. And you wait and you wait and you wait, and then you get the wave, and you're like, yeah, okay, oh, I stood up, and you fall over. And then, like, you might not catch another wave for half an hour. It takes a while, a lot of energy to paddle out there. So even unless you're just, like, super, prime fit, and you surf a lot, and you got a lot of upper body strength, by the time you finally get back out to where, the waves are crashing, like right at that perfect spot where there's probably 50, 60 people all staring at you, you're probably tired. And you're probably like, okay, I'm not going to catch the wave right away because I'm not going to have enough upper body strength and speed to get to that actual wave. And then I'm not going to get the most out of that wave. And so if you're surfing for 3 hours, you might only catch 6 or 7 waves. At least that was my experience. I'm not a great surfer, but there's something about when you actually catch a wave and ride it well and feel good about what you did, that right when you get to the shore, right when you get off your board, all you want to do is do another one. But it takes a while. And that's kind of where I'm at with the podcast, is after I did the first podcast, I was like, okay, I know what I did wrong. I know what I can do better. I know what I can work on. I'm excited to work on that next week. And then not only through working on those things the following week did that alert me to other things that I needed to change about the podcast, either in its format or just the way that I speak, the way I handle myself, the way I address things to people. One of my classic mistakes that comes from me doing Trailer Jones and me doing Cup of Jones a lot is I like to talk. And so when I introduce new topics, I talk for a long time and then I pass it off to the panelists. So one thing that I tried to do, and I actually kind of threw Huber a little bit. Huber's like, what are you talking about? Because I don't think he was used to that from me. But Kyle would do this a lot. If there was a physical object, if there was a person or a thing or a place or a poster or something that needed to be described, Kyle would throw that at the panel. He'd be like, what is this? What are we looking at here? Describe it for me. And that was always fun to kind of speak to those calls that were sent to us from Kyle. And so I threw that at Huber, but I obviously should have done that earlier in the discussion of specifically what the PlayStation 5 looked like. I should have known that when we were talking about the PlayStation 5, we were going to talk about the form factor of the actual console first. And so just generally organizing these things is a series of lessons to be learned going from one podcast to the other. The other thing is every podcast is different. Every podcast has different love and respect submissions. Every podcast covers a whole different slew of news. And it's been really interesting looking at all of the headlines each week and trying to figure out what would be interesting conversations or not. How long are we going to talk about something specifically? If we don't talk about something, then what happens? When do I cut people off? Looking at the clock, is in what instances do I want to keep the conversation going? In what instances do I want to accept that the conversation is slowly dying down and we should move on to the next topic? A lot of those things, just like surfing, I have to paddle real hard and then catch that wave when it comes by, take the lesson. And I got to wait a whole week before I really get to implement those things. A lot of that stuff, I still think I have work to do in terms of doing a really good podcast. I think my third or fourth podcast, I think it was the third one, I felt really, really good about. When it ended, we were all in really high spirits. I felt we were, joking, playing off each other a lot. And so I've gone back and watched that podcast to kind of like figure out to capture whether it was just the headlines we were talking about or whether it was just, dumb luck that it just happened to the attitude just happened to be positive in that way. So there's a lot of things that I am learning as I go along. There's a lot of things that I am satisfied with in terms of my performance. From the first podcast that I have done until now, I have never been satisfied with the opening bit. I was really nervous about thinking of what that opening bit was. I arrived at Gaming Gladiators, which for those of you that might not listen to the Easy Allies podcast, is basically, what if Lara Croft fought Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn? It's like just pick two gaming characters. What if they fight each other to the death? Who would win and why? And that really speaks to me personally. It's kind of like I tried to think of what would be funny for our audience. I tried to think of what would work that would be different from things that Kyle had done. And I finally just said, you follow your heart, Jones. What speaks to you personally? What interests you in terms of being curious about something within video games, wanting to get information from your colleagues, your coworkers in regards to something involving video games. And I talked about the MCU a couple weeks back, and one of my favorite things about the MCU and one of my favorite things about thinking about the Justice League and DC characters a lot is who's more powerful than another person. What are the checks and balances? Like, obviously, Hulk is the strongest Avenger, but he doesn't really have control over what he does, for the most part. And obviously Iron Man, is incredibly smart, but is also really cocky and can get himself in tricky situations. So it's fun to see, those pluses and minuses when you talk about the strength of a character and then how those can adapt. And then I think I've gotten better as weeks have gone on about picking certain matchups for specific people. I think Chris Redfield versus Leon Kennedy, I think was the best out of all the Gaming Gladiator stuff that we have done. Another thing that you have to consider that I haven't talked about a lot publicly, but hey, this is Cup of Jones. I get to talk about it all I want. YouTube comments are rough. Right? I mean, that's not news. You didn't need me to say that. You didn't need to tune in to Cup of Jones today and hear me say that. And again, shout out to Daniel Bloodworth, who does the majority of the YouTube comment reading here at Easy Allies and policing a lot of that stuff. I have been at this job for almost 2 decades. I generally don't read YouTube comments. I don't find a lot of value in them because I think a lot of people that come to YouTube, and this is not true of everybody, and apologies for people that are watching right now or listening to this later that have left YouTube comments. And they're like, oh, come on, man. Like, I left you a comment. You didn't read it? The majority of the comments that happen on those videos are from just kind of fly-by-night people. They're just people that are just kind of touring through the internet, and then they just happen upon this video, especially a lot of the negativity that we're seeing surrounding The Last of Us Part 2 review, which is kind of like, okay, thanks. But I don't, because we have so many other channels, because I have Cup of Jones, because we have Patreon, because I have, Twitter, because I have people that are very much invested in me personally in the things that I'm doing. Those are a lot of the comments that I value much better. And I've had much more. And I have had lots of great experiences for people that have DM'd me or given me a heads up about mistakes that I've made in the past or possibly alerting me to other comments. And so I very much appreciate that involvement, and I like having those relationships in terms of feedback about the work that I'm doing. And I've also found that I've been doing this job long enough that whether it was countdowns we did back in the day, or retrospectives, or reviews now, or changes I've made to Trailer Jones, or now that I'm working on the podcast, I need to be confident in the decisions that I make personally for me to work on something week after week after week after week after week. I'm not just going to take a note from something somebody says in a YouTube, video, apply that to something that I do, and then have the next week somebody say, an opposing comment, and then, okay, well, I got to go back to the thing I did before. I really wait, of the YouTube comments that I have read in the past, I really wait to see if something resonates with an opinion that I have. In the case of the podcast, I have to read YouTube comments because that's where those beautiful corrections are. And in that case, I think YouTube is very appropriate for those corrections, because those do pertain to people that are stopping by very quickly and being like, oh, cool podcast episode. But you were wrong in that one aspect because, I don't watch your streams. I don't watch other stuff. I just watch this podcast. And I know that, Sam Lake was in the original Max Payne, or Max Payne 3, that was a voice that you could, or that was a face, sorry, a skin that you could get, the original Sam Lake Max Payne face. Those comments really do come fast and accurately. It's always good to research that stuff from YouTube comments. But going through those YouTube comments has been and again, this is not news for a lot of people, but has been an interesting addition to my emotional state. It is something where I do a lot of that stuff on Wednesday. So we do the podcast on Thursday. Thursday is when I really solidify what stories we're going to cover, who needs to do research on what. That's when I usually gather a lot of information for bets. But Wednesday is my really like news digging day, and that's when I grab corrections, because corrections are corrections. Not like the Thursday will suddenly bring forth a whole new slew of corrections over a video that was posted 6 days earlier. And I have not felt good after any of those sessions reading those comments, because a lot of people have a very distant relationship with Easy Allies. And so they're going to come in, they're going to be extremely harsh, extremely opinionated. And boy, those comments absolutely hate Gaming Gladiators. I think ever since I've started that opening segment, nobody's really weighed in positively on Gaming Gladiators. It's stopped a little bit less, but I think on the last video, there was somebody who just said really simply, one sentence, Gaming Gladiators has got to go. And all of these comments after that were just like, yeah, I hate it. It's just so boring and it takes too long. One note that I took right away was I would do 3 matchups, and then I whittled that down to 2. Sometimes I just do 1. I direct them at a very specific person. I try to speed up that segment as much as I possibly can. I was confused because a lot of people said Gaming Gladiators doesn't have an end point, and a lot of Bossman's bits didn't either. And the other thing about Bossman bits is when I would talk to him about opening bits when we were working on the podcast before, he would frequently say that everybody hated his opening bits. He's like, oh yeah, everybody hates every opening bit I've ever done. And when we would go back, do a post-mortem on bits that we had done recently or in the distant past, he would always speak to the negative reaction that it would get from our community. And if you know Kyle, he loves that stuff. Most of the time he loves doing something that, This Week in Joker News, he loves doing something that makes us all roll our eyes and makes our audience groan, that he just kind of pushes forward and shoves down our throats. That's not me. It's just not my personality. It's just not, as a moderator, I really need to be myself. And one thing that I accepted is that there is a perspective that Kyle will have on this industry that I don't share with him. It's why the two of us, I think, worked really well, bouncing off of each other, because we would have very fun disagreements. Kyle might be one of my favorite people to disagree with, but I can't suddenly be another person, and I can't find somebody within Easy Allies and be like, okay, you're Kyle now. It's like, so I knew if Blood's going to be my co-moderator, this guy has a different role in this podcast. His role is going to be more research, to be more fact checking in the moment, to be, someone who obviously has read up on a lot of these things beforehand, or someone who has what Kyle has that I'm slowly developing, is just a general greater understanding of who's doing what at any given time in this business. If we hear about a company, Blood quicker than me will generally know, oh yeah, that person used to work for this company, or oh, that's the person that developed this game, or yeah, that game was already announced but has only been in development for so long. So the podcast has really kind of evolved and will continue to evolve in just a more business focused show. It will be less funny. It just is. The laughs that you get from that will be more from things that spontaneously happen in a moment. Never in my life Never when I was a child, when I was in high school, when I was in college, when I was in game trailers. I have never written comedy ever. I've never planned those things. I've never been like, this is going to be hilarious. The funny bits just happen in the moment. It's a genuine thing because all of us love to work together. We love to gather and talk about these things. We love to be together when these big moments happen in video games. I want to facilitate those moments. But the idea of constructing an ongoing comedy bit that will have a payoff at the end, it's just not what I'm good at, and I don't want to pretend that I'm good at it. The problem is we have a $5 tier of people that are involved, obviously, in getting early access content from Easy Allies, but are involved in the love and respect portion of the show at the end, which, if we're lucky, we can get maybe 3, 4, 5 questions, most likely 2 or 3. And I'm getting hopefully better. A lot of people are like, it's okay if the show runs long. One reason why I want the show to be short as possible, that I really want to start wrapping up all the conversations by about an hour and 20 minutes, is that I want to have as many love and respect moments as possible, because not only are those really rich and interesting and offer a completely different perspective from our audience to us that you would not get if it was just us talking, but are oftentimes very different from all the nonsense we'd been talking about for that hour and 20 minutes. So I want to do something. I want to have something at the beginning of the podcast that involves those people at that tier, and another thing that I've done, I admittedly have not done a lot of it in the last couple weeks because there have not been comments like that, but sometimes people weigh in on something that we're about to talk about. Sometimes people have an opinion or have a question or something, and I encourage people to do it at that tier. If you are at $5 or above and you are involved in submitting stuff for love and respect every week, I want people to offer opinions that then will be a launch pad for conversations that we'll have in the podcast. And so that's another way that you could potentially be involved outside of the opening bit, outside of love and respect. I want to float something right now and see what you think. Let me know in the comments, because even though I'm probably going to be sunsetting Gaming Gladiator soon, I still want to give it a couple more weeks because there are particularly some matches. Kratos has got to fight somebody at some point. So there are some matchups that I want to do later. Maybe I'll do like the lightning round of the Gaming Gladiators and be like, okay, it's only time for the big boys, the big gaming characters, the big strong people that we have not talked about. None of this claptrap silliness. One idea that I had, and I think this will be the trend moving forward, is it's not a bit. Basically, it's just me asking for information from our community, much like a news headline that I can then pass along to the people, because every now and then you get those love and respect questions or comments that say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a teacher, I'm a soldier, I live in Russia, here's this other perspective that you don't have. And I think it would be interesting to start the podcast with that. So one of the ideas that I'm having right now is a segment that's it's called something like Silver Lining. That's like, okay, before we get into the gaming news of the week, this is a very trying time for the gaming industry, for human beings in general. So let's have a little positivity. This next segment comes from, Elmo, from our community. And, they said, hey, my cousin started playing this game, started playing Animal Crossing. He had never played games before. My uncle has disabilities, and he recently picked up this game and was able to play it, and he's very much enjoyed that. My grandmother, who doesn't play games, just picked up Animal Crossing, has very much enjoyed it. Just something where it's like, oh, what a wonderful story. Okay, cool, let's get into gaming news. Something that has an air of positivity, and then it's like, bring it, YouTube comments. I want to see people in the YouTube comments that are like, yeah, that thing where you guys were happy at the beginning of the podcast, I didn't care for it. Like, well, it's generally what the opening bits are supposed to be. And I think all of the Easy Allies have strengths, and we should focus on them. We should lean on them. We should highlight them. And the talents required for doing the opening bits that you have enjoyed from Kyle Bossman, I do not have. And I do not think the podcast is the right place for you to see me struggle with it or develop it or try or pretend that I'm good at those things. I did very much enjoy the Game Jam. I would like to bring that back someday. I didn't want to do that right out of the gate with taking over the podcast to just be like, easy, let's just do a Game Jam. Potentially, maybe we get back in the studio. I think it would be a good time to do that because game development might be very tricky for some people right now because they're like, hey, I would love to be involved, but I don't have a job, so I got to search for a job. I can't spend my time developing some game that I'm never going to get paid for. So I think when things normalize a little bit more and the planet Earth kind of gets back to the way it was at the beginning of this year, if that's even a thing that all of us want, then that might be a better time for is Elmo an Easy A fan? I don't know. We should ask him. I'm getting to know Elmo a lot more, having the little boy. I'm curious what Milo's going to think of Elmo. Milo's been introduced to Kermit the Frog through me, obviously, through a very poorly recreated impersonation and puppeteering job. I think I'm better at puppeteering Kermit than I am at doing the voice. But there it is. There's how I currently stand. Again, I'm not like alerting you to changes that are going to happen in the podcast this week. This week's podcast, in terms of the opening bit, is going to be the same as last week's podcast. But I just wanted to let you know what I'm thinking of. I wanted to get your feedback. Apologies if I don't include all of that feedback in next week's episode again. And just in general, it's always good to tell people, if you're listening to this entire episode, I look for those questions. That's the stuff that we address on Cup of Jones. If there's a question mark at the end of your statement, that's something I want to answer for you. But a lot of times people will just let me know stuff, and then I'll be like, thanks. And I give you a little like on Patreon, possibly a comment, but it's not something we generally bring up on the podcast unless it inspires me to do an editorial on it. But there we go. That was that editorial. That's where I'm at. Opening bits are tough. And again, there were some things with the podcast and I'm like, ooh, that's tough, but I want to get better at it. Opening bits is not one of those things. It's one of those things that so some of those, if you go back and re-listen to the podcast that I did with Kyle before he left, the kind of one-on-one conversation, there were some things automatically that I got rid of because I was like, I want to do things differently. I'm not comfortable in doing those things. Opening bit was something that I thought was really, really important the way it was currently structured for the podcast. But I got to throw in the towel and accept that it's not a skill that I have, not a talent that I think is worth developing for Easy Allies, and potentially a part of the podcast that I can change into something that I think will be a positive benefit for the show. I think will be something more in line with ideas that I think up, and hopefully be something you enjoy. But I'm sure if people don't, they'll let me know in those YouTube comments. Again, shout out to Daniel Bloodworth for reading all of those. So there we go. Our big takeaway from this week is wish list this, which will, may not be that in name. You'll probably see a version of that on Friday or Sunday, depending on when you listen to the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Again, thank you for watching all of our reactions, for making those really big, for really kind of pushing us to be one of the big destinations. We got huge views on especially for that Sony event. I think we were up above 7,000 on Twitch, and so it's really nice that a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm not really involved in Easy Allies, but when they do reactions, that's when I tune in. It's a good feeling, and it's very exciting to share a lot of this excitement, and especially from a weekend where it's just like 10,000 games just suddenly, popped in front of our eyeballs. Really interested to hear what all of you like. I'm reading up on a lot of that stuff on social media, but what games you're excited about, and what the rest of the year looks like for you in terms of how it's starting to shape out what games we're going to get when, what we're going to be playing on these next gen consoles, and what games in fact are coming out in 2020. That is your episode of Cup of Jones. Stay safe, everybody. Stay safe. Have a good week.